One of the simplest and most effective ways of reducing stereotype threat is to attack the awareness of the stereotype. It's not likely you can remove the stereotype or change the stereotype, but you can often reduce how much people have the stereotype come to mind. So, how do we reduce awareness of a stereotype? First, let me talk about one bad way to do it. Myth busting is bad in all of its many forms. Often when people are first interested in diversity, they do a lot of bad things in the myth-busting space. They will point out when somebody of a stereotypically penalized group has done well on an exam and say, ooh, our highest score was from so-and-so who is a member of group X, right? This kind of activity increases awareness of the stereotype, right? It's also bad to say, you may have heard that people with small ears are bad at computing. It's not true, because every time you say that, you implicitly tell people that the stereotype exists. It will raise awareness. Okay? If you feel it can occasionally be useful to point out this information, but you want to try to do it in as neutral a way as possible. For example, if you want to point out that members of minorities or females in your class have done well in your class compared to the class as a whole, showing the overall grade distribution so that the individuals can privately see their own position can be a way of them receiving this feedback without you saying, oh, and the girls did better than the boys, or whatever it is that you wanted to say. So you want to avoid myth busting. The biggest single thing you can do to reduce awareness, though, myth busting not being one, right? But a good thing to do is to remove triggers. Remove things that will cause people to reflect upon the stereotype as a whole. Okay? An easy one here is names and pronouns, particularly in examples you give. Okay? When you're giving an example, what names do you use? When you're using variables in your example code, do you use names? When you refer to things, do you use masculine or feminine pronouns? It turns out that almost anything you pick will be likely to remind people of some stereotype, right? If you use all male pronouns, that will stand out. If you use all female, that will stand out. If you use all genderly ambiguous names, or if you use there where you ought to use he or she, all of these things will tend to go wrong. Certainly a mix is better than having all of them be the same, but my general suggestion is to say things like the student in your examples, or person X, etc. And try to use plurals where you need pronouns, or to refer to them again by name, various things that can remove that level of reminding people of the pronoun, of the genders and ethnicities in what you're doing. There are other things that perhaps you think of less. But, for example, if you're going to ask demographic information, you want to put it at the end of whatever you're asking, right? If you want to be able to measure how different demographies do on an exam, ask them after they finish the exam, not before. Don't remind them going in, right? You don't want to explicitly segregate people, and if you need to do so, you want to make sure you do it or implicitly integrate them, right? You don't want to refer to their gender, their race, their stereotypically threatened group as little as you can. Groups are sort of an interesting mixed space. There's all kinds of different ideas about balancing the participation in groups or so on. And the jury is out, I would say. It doesn't appear to be a single clear answer. But one thing that tends to be true is having groups is good. In general, having groups is good for stereotypically threatened groups because it puts them in a smaller community in which they won't feel as much of a minority. And majority in group can go well if the group works almost exclusively by themselves. But if they're going to be contrasting themselves to all the other groups, they can become the ghetto group. in their own minds. Even if you don't think of it that way, they might. And so you might want to try to distribute across groups, okay? And how what the right thing is appears to be fairly sensitive to the situation. There are studies suggesting both forms are good. So whatever you think, try it, pay attention, see what works. But I also want to talk in particular about a study that has to do with decor. There's a lot of different things that can impact people's awareness. And there's this fascinating paper, there's been several since, about this idea of ambient belonging, different cues, and how those cues can impact stereotype threat. This paper is an interesting read, but I just want to bring out one particular graph from the paper. They did a study to determine what people stereotypically associated with computer science and not. And then they presented rooms that were stereotypically either computer science-y or not computer science-y, and then asked a variety of questions about different people. And one of the things they found is that when you remove the stereotypical signals from the system, you'll see that there's quite a large error bar overlap here. It's not clear that any had any impact on the males. Perhaps a small decrease in interest, but nothing significant. However, when you look at the gap for the females, the stereotypically threatened group, you see two standard deviations of difference, right? A significant increase in interest and a sense of belonging and inclusion that came about with that, right? So as you're thinking about decoration, each individual has a different ability to control this. You might have your own classroom or your own lab that you can actually think about different posters or different layouts. And often we're pretty bad at figuring out what is good in these because we tend to be in the in-group, right? We are used to the way that we expect computer science labs or computer science professors' offices to be decorated. So ask somebody else, ask somebody from a different group to give you advice. And not necessarily, how do I make this look less computery, but just how do I make it look nicer? How can I clean it up? How can I improve it? What posters can I remove? What can I replace to make my space look more inviting to more people? And as you do this, you can remove the triggers, cause people to reflect on the stereotypes less often, and significantly reduce stereotype threat.